Hello there. I am so glad that y'all are here because this has been something that was kind of it might have been a challenge. It might. So I am fortunate enough to be welcoming Brent Raynes, who is somebody that we are coming to you live, and we are coming to you from the Ozark Mountain UFO Conference in beautiful Eureka Springs, Arkansas. And Brent has written a book. He is a ufology investigator, experiencer too, maybe.
Well, I don't know what to call those experiences sometimes, but some, yeah.
Some of them are just kind of defy explanation, don't they?
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the synchronicity that kind of precognitive things that happen to a lot of people. But yeah, it's anyway. I wrote a few years ago, John A. Keel, The Man, the Myths, and the Ongoing Mysteries, and John Keel was a character in ufology who really set me on the course that I find myself on today. I started out as a teenage ufologist. I didn't know the word at the time, but way back in 1967, age 14. So a lot of water under the bridge. But I didn't realize what all different components and things were involved in ufology. I know there's a gentleman in ufology named Alan Greenfield, and he came out with a term called paraufology for it, because there's all these other elements. When you get involved with close encounters, the supposed alien contact encounters, and strange creatures that are seen to be associated, and so many paranormal dimensions to the phenomenon. And Keel was really pursuing all that back in the 60s, when many people in ufology were simply satisfied with cataloging the different descriptions of flying objects, and a number of the top people in the field had wanted nothing to do with so-called occupant reports, things like that. And Keel jumped right in and started investigating this thing called Mothman down in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. That was taboo, all that, with a lot of people. In fact, one of the major groups of the time, started by Major Donald Keyhole, was the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena in Washington, D.C. And, Keyhole and his field investigators wanted nothing to do with a UFO that landed, much less a being got out. Heaven forbid, because he associated with the lunatic fringe. These people are just nuts.
Well, that even to a degree carries into today.
To some degree, it does. I think there's more people listening now to some of the other, what Dr. Hynek called high strangeness, because he couldn't, after so many years, he realized, well, he tried to come up with categories to put them in. This is a close encounter of the first kind, the second kind, the third kind, like the movie back in 1977 with Steven Spielberg. And then he got to the point, well, I don't know what to call it. It's a high strangeness,
Well, it is high strangeness, because it's unlike any other encounters that people have. I'm also a paranormal investigator, and I experience voices. I experience beings, and it blows me away. But it's a completely different experience from anything I've found in ufology. These are physical.
Well, maybe not as much as
a lot.
It's physical and sometimes paraphysical. With John Keel, one of his first books in 1970 was Strange Creatures from Time and Space. It's often ignored because really people were waiting for his book Operation Trojan Horse, which had all these revelations in it.
Right.
But Strange Creatures was actually part of Operation Trojan Horse. The publisher said he just couldn't put it all in one book. Let's break it up into two. So he wrote in that first book, Strange Creatures, that, to him, aliens, ghosts, what's the difference? It's all in a frame of reference. They can all levitate. They can all communicate telepathically. They go through solid walls. He thought they had a lot in common. And he also studied religious apparitional phenomena, Marian apparitions, and both him and the French scientist Jacques Vallée, quite well known in the field too,
Yes.
and another original thinker. He and both of them thought that team of Portugal, the dance of the sun, the Marian apparitions that appeared to children, and then on October 13th, 1917, the whole thing built up to the point where an estimated 70,000 people witnessed this big circular thing that came down out of the clouds. It had been raining. Suddenly the ground dried up. There were all these different colors. People thought the sun was going to come down and crash on them and kill them all. You know, they were quite startled. That was a major event, and it had a lot of characteristics similar to UFOs. But the UFOs, as you study it, delve into it, and talk with witnesses, they do things like, talk to some people who said they saw a flying saucer, what we call a flying saucer, and it went into a hillside and disappeared, kind of ghost-like, you know. People see aliens that walk through solid walls. Well, what is that alien? You know, is it something that conforms maybe to our expectations and our beliefs?
That's a good point.
Rosemary Guiley, who's now passed, but she helped me with doing the book, suggested people I should interview because I wanted to show how his work. Because a lot of people thought I was just writing a John Keel biography, but it was partly that. But I also wanted to show how people like myself and others were affected by his research, and it's an ongoing mystery, which is the last part of the title.
Yes, it is actually.
So it's, I just turned 73, started out at 14, so I don't know how much longer I have here, but I mean, while I'm here, I doubt it's going to.
Well, we're hoping you have a lot more time, Derek.
Well, I appreciate it. So. But I don't know that we'll have when we'll have the final conclusion to it all, but listening to some of the speakers here at the, this conference, I'm hopeful that we're at least on the right track. Let's talk about consciousness and the physics, advanced physics, quantum physics, or holograms. I don't know. As Keel used to write on his business card, all these things. He's a photographer, journalist, but not an authority on anything. So I kind of like that. I'm open to pursuing everything, even things I might have a knee-jerk reaction initially that I disagree with or I'm not sure about, but I don't know. I'm not really an authority. If you're, what you need to be is just someone who is open and serious and truthful, of course. I remember one ufologist was quite well known, Jim Moseley, said that when things, information wasn't too much activity, you'd go out and hoax something just to keep the reader satisfied.
Well, that's not unheard of. I mean, there's a paranormal show that gets a lot of heat for that being a perception over time. And I don't think that's really a deserved heat because you can never know what somebody else is experiencing. There have been so many people that were true experiencers of the UFO, ET connection, whatever, that would come forward and be kind of laughed off. And when people started really researching, when MUFON created their experiencer groups, thanks to Kathy Martin, people were less afraid to come forward. My first conference was here. My next one was Contact in the Desert, which had a huge experiencer support area. I didn't know what that was. They were down in a bar. They were all communicating with each other. And I'm media. I'm not supposed to be there as an experiencer because that's very private, that's very personal, and it's very guarded. They're very well protected. And I was unaware. But when people start sharing, they need that safe place, whether they've experienced documents, as we say, or if they've just experienced the actual phenomenon of seeing a craft that's indescribable, that's unrecognized. And something is flying those, or someone, unless they're operating as drones. And I think it's really an interesting thing when you start listening to people have had physical manifestations of what they say are interactions.
Yeah, the best approach is an unstructured interview. We start out with just telling their own story in their own words. And a good example of that was Jacques Vallée in Confrontations, his book Confrontations.
Yes.
He tells about a woman in California, and she sees this craft raise up. He'd already read the report by some other investigators, and so he went to interview her himself. And she says, and then the craft went through these trees. And he says, you mean like they went around them? No, it went right through them.
Yeah.
And he says, well, how come that wasn't in the original report? She says, well, the investigators came, and I could tell that they weren't going to listen to that because they'd already expressed their views, which was, it was a nuts and bolts thing. They had to behave in a certain way.
That happens a lot.
So she told the story just where, she described the craft as it was and everything else, but and how it took off up the valley. But left that, and also the fact that a being appeared at her bedside, because again, they just didn't really have the mindset that would be receptive to that kind of information. She had already picked up on that. So they had obviously already, as I have experienced with other investigators, I remember one in Tennessee, he wrote a column for a local newspaper, and he got into the UFO thing. So he said, Brent, I've got 3 witnesses to a UFO. Would you like to come along? Sure. So we got there, and what he does, before they could even say a word, he tells them about the Men in Black and Bigfoot and alien contact. And I'm thinking, oh, I wonder what we're going to hear here. But it was all right. They just told, we saw this cylindrical looking object moving across the sky. And I said, okay, I believe them.
Yeah.
But it could have backfired.
Well, that's often the case, though. And not only that, people who experience one realm of oddity often have multiple experiences in different fields of oddities.
Mm-hmm.
I've found that to be true in a lot of cases.
Yeah, they've even been compared to the UFO contact experience to near-death experiences and other areas. So it can just be like Kenneth Ring, a long time ago, a psychologist, the Amiga Project, the book he wrote, comparing near-death experiences to, well, at the time, simply called them alien abductions. They had many similarities. They went through a change, and they had psychic sensitivity, increased awareness. It changed their lives. They became better people by and large, more positive in their outlooks. So, it's interesting that some people, their experience is kind of negative. I like Skinwalker Ranch, and I wonder, if that's because the mindset starts out like you got people from the military, and if that influences kind of a feedback effect from the phenomena. Greg Bishop of Radio Mysterious out in L.A. He's talked about his idea that we're actually kind of co-creators of this phenomena. It's influenced, whatever it is, by what we're putting out there, and sometimes we get a feedback effect, or what John Keel called a reflective factor. And
that happens. I mean, we create and manifest reactions in social interactions amongst other humans. People react in how they perceive us as coming at them sometimes. And like, I can be a very strong voice, or I get very enthusiastic, and people will think that I'm being almost aggressive, and I'm not. I'm very assertive. I am very assertive. Y'all all know that. But I'm not aggressive. Sometimes my enthusiasm overwhelms me and other people. So, but with this subject, when I first started talking to people who had implants, who had different histories, especially when I talked to someone who was having an implant removed and it ran from a scalpel, and that was on video. And I had not heard of that being a thing, and my mind was blown, because I thought, why would there be something that would have a perceived intelligence to not allow itself to be removed. This person had all kinds of incisions from trying to get that out. But
Oh, so it would move inside the body somewhere to.
it would move from the scalpel.
Oh,
It was perceived as running from the scalpel.
okay. Were you saying you were there at the time, or you were just
I saw the
watching
video.
You saw
I
the
saw video. And I was just like, oh, I would have left. I would have left. I would not have allowed that to continue to happen to me.
Yeah.
But it's wild that
And
there's so many sides to this, right?
There are, and it's, you have to keep your mind open and listen to all the stories and
But not let your brain fall out.
yeah, don't be so open-minded your brain
Yes.
falls out. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
My dad taught me that a long time ago.
I heard that somewhere along the line too.
Yes, it's good advice.
Mhm.
You know, be open with evidence, and or at least the credibility of the person that you're speaking to, right?
And back in 1973, I met an experiencer in Florida. I had corresponded with her a year or two earlier, and my ship, I was in the Navy, became home ported there in Mayport, Florida.
Okay.
And I remembered she had a P.O. box down at Jacksonville Beach, a few miles away.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote to her, and I even went down and watched the mailbox to see if she came to pick up the mail, you know.
Right.
Because I wanted, you know, she had claimed that she'd had a close encounter with a UFO, her husband, and one of her sons, who was 13 at the time, and they passed right under it, and it was a domed disc-shaped object, classic
Right.
kind, about 40 feet diameter, and then it moved away off toward this Coast Guard station, and then two jet interceptors came in, perhaps from Jacksonville Naval Station, that's our best guess, and the craft suddenly turned a bright glowing color like a burning coal, she said, and then took off out of the Atlantic Ocean and just left them like they were standing still. And then about 3 or 4 days after that, her home erupted with poltergeist activity. And of course, we know that parapsychologists talk about poltergeist activity can change, some kind of traumatic experience can also evolve into maybe poltergeist. And John Keel wrote that was fairly common with a lot of UFO encounters, especially the close encounter of the beings and so on. The experience seems to affect their consciousness and may evolve into all kinds of a full spectrum of all kinds of paranormal activity. So in her case, it did. Eventually, it evolved to where at 3 o'clock in the morning, she would wake up and would be paralyzed, and there would be a being standing at the side of her bed. Then her 13-year-old son, who was there during the encounter, would come into her room and want to get in the bed because there were strange beings in his room and balls of light and such. And she had tried to, she said she tried to prevent him from having that experience. And she wrote to John Keel and was seeking his advice and, what to do and so on. She became a ufologist because of that. A lot of ufologists are actually people who had experiences themselves, and they're just looking for answers too, and they end up becoming, involved in the whole field. And then while I knew her, I was around, at that. Her husband was in the Navy at that time, but he was out at sea. But he was home ported there, so she was right on base. So here I was thinking she was somewhere down in Jacksonville Beach, and she was right at the same base. It's like, what a coincidence.
Small world.
Yes. I never expected that I would land in the same place. And, she had this story of all this poltergeist activity, always hearing the voice up to her, saying her periodically her first name, Ramona. And there would be footsteps, nobody there, and different odors. And then eventually the beings. And so anyway, eventually she just decided to try something new. There was an area called Brooksville on the other side of Florida, and that was where there was a lot of people putting Bigfoot and UFOs, but she decided to go after the Bigfoot. And
most people don't go after Bigfoot.
Yeah, she says, I think the Bigfoot thing's going to be different. This is more physical. And I said, you sure? So She went over
because
there.
they're interdimensional.
Yeah, but she was not really, this was in 1973. She wasn't necessarily thinking it was. And she thought it'd be maybe a little something different. And
Maybe easier to find.
maybe, and she did encounter, there was a ranch. I went over and talked to the people. Her and a fellow investigator named Dwayne, they showed me, he showed me where he had seen a UFO fly over him at the driveway, had a big round thing with these huge glass windows. And up the road away, she showed me a place where a big ball of fire came down, landed in the road, but then it bounced back up in the air. And they had seen Bigfoot at the ranch themselves. And now she was
This
thinking,
was someplace everybody should go,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
To get full.
Bricksville actually.
There we are. Sorry, guys.
So in March of 1965, there was a John Reeves down there in Brooksville. He was a retired New York longshoreman, and he claimed that he encountered a landed craft and a what he thought maybe was a humanoid form of a robot. Had a helmet on, and anyway, there was a flashlight. The guy thought maybe it took his picture, you know, and then it started rushing toward a craft, and the craft rose up after the beam got in, and then at some point there were like two sheets of paper that came down, and they had strange writing on them. And he gave them to the Air Force, and then they gave them back to him, and they well they said it said something like, supposedly in their translation, something about planet Mars. We miss you very much when you're coming home.
A Dear John letter almost.
Yeah.
On that, a
was
swag
John.
letter. It was a swag letter, right? Sealed with a kiss. Come home.
Yeah. But then a psychiatrist friend of mine, Dr. Berthold Schwartz, who entered the field because of John Keel, was already a parasite, interested in parapsychology, studying it, wrote books on it. And he had presented in a medical journal 4 cases of people he'd interviewed who he considered sound people who had UFO encounters. And Bert was going to be, that was going to be it. After that, he was going to go back to parapsychology. But John Keel saw him and heard him being interviewed by Paul Harvey. And so he contacted Dr. Schwartz and said, we need people like you in the field because, you know, you're interested in paranormal, you're aware of the UFO, the two can come together. And he got him in touch with Charles Bourne, who was the editor of Flying Saucer Review in London, England.
Yes.
And very respected magazine. It's too bad it's not still published now, but it was several decades. It was one of the leading UFO magazines out there. And so anyway, this is kind of a round robin who's about to try to set this up, but Dr. Schwartz and another person in ufology told me they had met this guy down in Miami, Florida, who was someone who had technical skills and worked at TV stations, kept all the equipment running. Anyway, he told Dr. Schwartz and light object, but as it gets closer, it's like Jenny Randall's an England researcher over there called it the Oz effect. You know, suddenly it's like a simulated reality. It may be you're in this room, but suddenly all these people that have been at this conference disappeared. You're suddenly alone, and then there's an alien in the room. You know, what just happened? You know?
You know, that truly happens a lot. When I have had the opportunity to speak with different experiencers that gave me permission, right? Because you never, for anybody listening, if someone has had an experience, that's their experience. And if they choose to share that, that's really a gift. And I know that y'all have heard me interview some experiencers over time, but I mean, you can't go this long and not, but it's still very personal to them. And I'm always respectful of that. And I know that in your work, you've had much more opportunity than I have to speak to people on a one-to-one level, trying to help them with that, right?
Well, yeah, I've been at this 58, little over 58 years, and people ask me, where do you come up with all these cases? I said, after 58 years, you know, you talk to a lot of people just in general. I don't know, I have a lot of stories that kind of illustrate different points about this, I feel, and some of them truly are high strange, and the witnesses, they have a lot to lose from sharing. I mean, some like they have respected PhD positions in different fields, and but they feel a need to speak out and share. You know, we met at a conference a woman from Brazil who was an American, but she moved to Brazil, a little town northwest of Rio de Janeiro, in the mountains, and she had a PhD in experimental psychology and anthropology, and those were her fields of interest. But she was also she would help a newsman from America, Bob Pratt, who wrote Brazil, you know, UFO Danger Zone, and you know, Bob was someone I had met early on in his, you know, interest in UFOs. He was a complete skeptic in the beginning, and he got to work with the National Enquirer. And one thing about the Enquirer, I mean, they were, you know, they presented, they had people who wrote some really wild, sensational stories, but they really were interested in doing credible reports on UFOs. And they sent him all over the world, and there was 4 times he went to Brazil, and he came to work with the Cynthia Lewis, Newby Lewis, no, Cynthia Newby, yeah, Cynthia Newby Lewis, I'll get it straight, and who lived down there and who could speak Portuguese, so she would be his translator. He'd spend 2 or 3 weeks at a time down there, going, you know, out in the jungles or to the city, wherever the people were. But a lot of times it was way up in the jungles. And
that's a mountainous area, right?
And these incredible stories of encounters. One of the best ones was one that the military down there and the news media was covering. It was on the island of Caleres at the mouth of the Amazon. And there was about 40 people who claimed that they had been struck by beams that would burn their skin. Said it felt like somebody placed a cigarette on their chest or their neck, and it would leave like it was actually like a sunburn on their torso, but at the same time, in the middle of it were these like 2 punctures, and they had bled a little after they were hit by the beam, and the beam would retract away, a white beam, and usually it was a UFO, but one time it was a being, looked like someone in a wetsuit, had like a like a ray gun, I guess, and hit this woman in the chest. And both Jacques Vallée and Bob Pratt separately interviewed a lot of these
Oh,
people.
really?
And the locals, they attributed it to this Chupa Chupa, some sort of legendary being,
Yes.
their belief system that was like a vampire, energy stealer. And so they said, and of course, the doctor on the island was this woman who was quite skeptical when they first came to her, those first two people, because she thought, some of these locals, this is part of their spiritual beliefs and whatever, and this is nonsense. But then they kept coming in one after the other, and they exhibited symptoms that she had to treat.
Oh wow, like what?
So they were dizzy, and they were low energy. Their red blood cell count went down, and so for about a week they would all be ill. Two people actually died.
Were they bleeding out? Because with the red cell count dropping like that.
Well, they were sick. I'm not sure. I mean, they did bleed out some. But,
That's scary.
Yeah, this was quite scary. And not all encounters are scary, but it wasn't because it reflected something of their beliefs in this other being. And it's, I don't know. Jacques Vallée struggled with it. So his first thought was, it's some military group doing some kind of experiments.
Testing.
But then as he studied the reports, it didn't sound like that. It was hard to pinpoint what the source was. The military got on the site, and they took lots of film. The news media was taking lots of pictures, and they ended up in the newspapers. And then Jacques Vallée reveals in his confrontations that he also found out that an American firm came down and bought up all the pictures. So he says somebody in the United States has good evidence of the reality of UFOs.
I think there are a lot of people who have good evidence of the validity of UFOs.
But meanwhile, I got to speak in December of 2005 at the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach, and this Cynthia Newby-Luce came up to attend because Jacques Vallée was also going to be there. So I'll speak at the same place as Jacques Vallée. And
having talked with you here, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Well, it was surprising.
I've interviewed him. That would not surprise me at all.
But I'd always read his articles. It was an honor to meet him. And then, besides that, Bob Pratt was planning to be there.
Really?
But he died 2 weeks before.
Oh, man.
And, I thought, doggone it. So we were hoping for a big gathering. And Denise Uchoa Stoner.
Okay.
No, Stone. Wait. I hate to call her Stoner. She's
She won't mind.
I don't know. I've interviewed her several times. But anyway.
Maybe not anymore.
Don't say that.
I'm teasing. I tease.
Anyway,
We all get names wrong sometimes.
Anyway, what was interesting about her is her grandfather, General Fredo Uchoa, was a famous, he was a famous man. He was an engineer, and he created a university, and he was known to want to help people. And he was very psychic from a young age, and had a lot of experiences. Plus he was became a parapsychologist. And he was no stranger to psychic phenomena. In 1968, they had all these sightings around near Brasilia. And his son, who later became a general, and of course his niece's dad, Paulo, they went out and took other people with them with different backgrounds, chemistry, photography, and so on, and wanted to study these strange lights. And what happened is here we have a general who became a contact experiencer. He actually saw an alien one time in the jungle, communicated with him telepathically. Denise told us several stories of encounters she had with UFOs. One time where she was paralyzed. He always advised her to be very careful. Some are good, some are bad. And he'd been in touch with the good ones. One of the first experiences she had was at a very young age. They always told her, the adults are going to go out and we're going to have, go to this place and we're going to communicate with them, but you have to stay behind. You're too young. she didn't like that, so she she decided to sneak in the back of a station wagon and pretend she was
Precocious.
pretending that she was asleep, and say, well, she looks like she's asleep, and she had her little Mickey Mouse clock set for a certain time for the alarm to go off. She'd know they were there,
Right.
and it went
She
off.
is precocious.
So she popped up and said, there they were all in a circle, holding hands, and there were all these lights. And she got out and she was staring at them, and the adults turned around and said, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
Well, since you're here. But anyway, that was her first experience. But yeah, and Jacques Belley had been there, so they wanted to meet Jacques Belley. So this was quite a gathering to meet all these people. And then
Yes.
later on, they went down to, and Bob Pratt had given Denise 5 audio files of where he had interviewed her grandfather, this general,
Right.
telling about his experiences in his life, speaking in English. And this was the first time Denise herself had heard her grandfather speak in English. It was always Portuguese. And also, she has 2 daughters here in America. She lives up in Virginia. She's even worked with the Navy as a translator and a teacher of different languages. She speaks Portuguese, Spanish, English, and French. And so anyway, so she told him, this is your grandfather, and he's speaking our language, what the language you're used to. And so anyway, Cynthia and Denise decided that there was this woman named Bernadette in Brazil who grew up in a very poor family, but the Ochoa family decided to pay her to come and stay with them and help with her education. And she would help around the house, kind of maid and cook and so on. And but she developed what they call Chagas, Chagas. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. But Denise explained to me that when you got it, that a lot of poor people lived in these clay huts, and there's a beetle bug that lives in the clay and it comes out at night. If it bites you, it can result in you having this disease where your heart starts to swell, and eventually there's nowhere else for it to go, and you die after a few years. And this girl ended up, this Bernadette, with that disease, and she got very ill. And so General Ochoa said, look, you guys, I've seen you have great power, you can fly around, so on. If there's anything you can do, I know that Jesus has the power to heal. I don't know if you can do anything or not, but if you can help this girl. Otherwise, if you can't, I am just going to discontinue my contact with you. So an agreement was made that they would.
Really?
And so he had to take her out to a designated location, put her on a little stool, and told her, sit here, everything's going to be all right. This ship is going to come down, and they said they're going to heal you. So I'll be just off here a little ways.
Wow.
And so this big blue light came down, and a voice spoke to her and said they were going to give her a shot. Raise your left arm. And then she felt like she got a shot, and also in her neck. And it felt like, to her, said it felt very painful, the shot, like she could feel it in her heart. But it was almost immediate. She started getting much better. The doctors, she went back to the hospital, and they said within a day or two they were going to drain fluid, and suddenly there was no fluid there. And the doctors were befuddled. And so these 2 women got together down there in Brasilia, and her father, who's now a General Paulo Ochoa, went to this hospital and got all the records. And they showed the records when they were out in Los Angeles a few years ago. They did a talk for a reform group out there. So there's a YouTube out there where they're explaining this on there as well.
Wow.
So it's, and she says down in Brazil, this was a big story. You go to the movie theater, and there's different trailers before the movie shows, and they often showed that story. So it just shows you the complexity and these stories and how contradictory they can be. Bob was very surprised when Denise told him, said, you've been studying these terrible injuries and things, but there's one case where somebody was healed. Mm-hmm. And this woman died just a few years ago. But she has 2 sons who are adults now and have been in the military and are leading good, healthy lives. Their life could have been,
Done.
ended way bad.
I have heard people talk about their healings from different things. I always feel like if we're ever going to do a public communication with these beings, I mean, I haven't seen a being. The craft that I saw had the windows covered, which was weird. And it was so random. I mean, I'm a back porch sitter, hammock layer, dog walker, so I see things, but they didn't show themselves to me. It was like they closed the windows, right? They were traveling in a cloud. It was so bizarre. The craft was actually in a cloud. And it was not huge.
But it must have been kind of lit up in order to...
The cloud was kind of a greenish yellow color. It's a very strange color. That's why I knew it was weird. It was only as high as my gazebo.
It was what?
It was as tall as my gazebo roof. I mean, that's how high it was.
Oh, okay.
The cloud just went right over my gazebo. And so it was very low flying. And then when it got out of my yard, it just kind of kept going slowly. But the lip of the craft came out of the cloud. And I was like, and I was on the phone with someone and I'm like, do not hang up. Do not hang up with me right now. Because I did not want a lost time incident. I'm not interested in that right now. Certainly not in the middle of the afternoon with my dogs out there with me, Somebody has to feed them.
So you were of that element of ufology. And could you tell a shape to this thing or just...
Well, yeah, because the front of it looked like the proverbial upside down pie plate. Okay. Like the seal. It wasn't riveted. It was just kind of like all tight. And there were what would have been windows if they didn't have coverings over them. But the coverings were the same color as the craft, silvery. And it just, the lip pulled out, just like to say, we know you're there. Here we are. And then that's when I'm like, do not hang up this phone. Do not hang up this phone. And then it just kept going and it went over the mountain behind my house. Well, the mountain's in front of my house, but I was like, but anyway, it just went over the mountain and it had to get elevation to do that. But I don't remember seeing it go all the way. I mean, I saw it go over my house. I didn't see it leave, which is what I would have expected. But I guess they were just meandering.
So, did anything unusual happen around that time that might have been connected, even though? Or did it change your way of thinking about certain things, maybe?
Well, I'd seen a craft, and then I had seen lights outside my window that same night. But that was when I was in 7th grade. That had been some time. And so I was actually, my dad was a Special Forces Green Beret 102nd Airborne. They had been, their National Guard unit had a jump that day. And so we'd go to watch those because it's fun. And we were having a cookout at my house that night, and I saw something in the sky. And I was like, what is that? Right. And my listeners have heard this story before about it, but it was so weird because to a T, and I mean, I knew what a helicopter looked like. That's what they jumped out of. And so all of them looked at each other, and then my dad looked at me and said, "It's a helicopter." And I'm like, "That is not a helicopter. I saw helicopters this afternoon. There's no noise." And, this was in the 70s. And I'm just like, "No, that's not what that is." And they all just looked at each other, and then they were laughing. I mean, they were like, they knew.
Yeah.
And so that night, in bed, there were green and white lights coming through my bedroom window. And my sister and I shared a room, and she was asleep. And I was just like, I don't even know what that is. But there was already something weird. And I did. I just pulled the covers up.
So that was all back in the 7th grade.
That was sixth
grade.
grade going into 7th grade.
Wow.
It was in the summer. But
That's weird.
and that was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, right near the university. We were in student housing. So my dad was finishing his degree.
That's strange that your father and the others, knew that it was not a helicopter, and yet
They told me it was. Yeah. It wasn't even shaped like a helicopter.
And so maybe did it ever come up with him that you said, "Hey, Dad, do you still think that was just a helicopter?"
They knew that was not a helicopter because they were laughing about it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Why most people wouldn't laugh about it, would they? I mean, they would say,
If it was a helicopter, they wouldn't. I mean, they had just jumped out of perfectly good helicopters.
right.
That
I mean,
day.
but if they're seeing this craft like what you
Yes.
saw,
Yeah.
then it sounds like they had already seen something like this before.
Mm-hmm. It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my dad was in, when he was younger, was in military intelligence. And I don't know why it wasn't that big of a deal to see that, whatever. I mean, if it was a helicopter, it would have been a big deal. That it wasn't a helicopter and they lied to me about it was a big deal.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was kind of precocious. I was an only child for 7 years. I was hung out with grown-ups and my mother taught me, well, she tried desperately to teach me to play bridge, but I sucked at that. So she taught me to do other games like spades and stuff so that when we were home alone in the afternoons, she would have somebody to play with. I mean, I was very, I was well loved and, wasn't prone to being lied to by my parents that I knew of. But it was so bizarre because I still don't know why. And there were like 4 couples there, Green Beret couples. And
Wow.
Green Berets will lie to you. Just so you know. I found out that, when I got older, Green Berets would still lie to me. So, just kidding. They were Navy jet pilots that lied to me.
Wow.
But out of Destin. But, it's just really, it's interesting because when I started realizing that people saw stuff, because I was only 7th grade and I was a year ahead for my age. And so when they lied to me about something that, I'm looking at it. There are no rotors. There's no noise. And if it was a helicopter, it would have been like the cigar shape with the rotors on top. And it was not. So it was really so frustrating. And I still wonder why they laughed. I think they thought they were putting one over on me, maybe. No.
But still,
It was a strange response.
Being military and something that close and that different from conventional aircraft.
Somebody
almost
should have
like-
gotten on the phone.
Yeah, somebody
I mean,
pulled
you
out the
know.
old machine guns. You
So-
would have thought that there would have been a different reaction. I mean,
Yeah, it was a totally inappropriate reaction for that situation because, I mean, it wasn't just the men out there. Well, it was men, kids, and the women were doing the fixings to go with the cookout.
yeah.
So, but I'll never forget that.
No,
And I will never forget because the lights that were in my room were green and white.
Hmm.
And it was interesting. It's interesting now from my perspective with the things that I research.
yeah. Almost sounds like that cloud cover may have been generated by the whatever it was. Because you hear stories kind of like that too.
Well, I had never seen, I mean, I live in a tornado prone area. If it were a stormy day or, the electromagnetic fields and stuff can create the illusion of color or can create color, I guess. But it was a beautiful day. And that was probably the only cloud I saw.
Wow.
So, and I did try to report that. But MUFON's website wouldn't accept the report. I've had that happen 3 times.
UFOn would accept the UFO
The computer
report?
system would not
Wow.
accept the report.
Hmm.
It was like, please try again later after you go through answering all those questions. It's a long reporting process because they want details. And I had them, but it wouldn't do.
Yeah. Well, there's the UFO Reporting Center in Washington State.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and Butch Wachowski's, the JAR program out of France. But it was another reporting group. And so he was somebody that was a great researcher. He's passed away, but he was very active in the international UFO community as well as paranormal research. And he's who first told me about Dogmen. And I was like, I'm done with the woods. Never again.
Yeah. I mean, back in the 70s, I was traveling around different states, and there was to Bigfoot, Florida. I was called out to New Jersey to investigate Somerville, just a short distance from New York City.
Mhm.
And there are people seeing Bigfoot.
Yes.
And so these people said I'd come, stay in their home for a few days, and go around and interview witnesses. And there was one guy that just, a young man who claimed that 2 months before, he's walking home at night along this country road and he hears footsteps behind him. He turns around and he's about 18 inches face to face, he said, with Bigfoot. And
That would be eye-opening.
but it had a happy ending. He still get beaten up by Bigfoot. There was a little light behind Bigfoot's shoulder, and it was making a high-pitched sound. He said, suddenly, me and the Bigfoot were just frozen, staring at each other.
Oh.
And then all of a sudden, the light went off, and the Bigfoot kind of blinked and turned around and went the other way, and he continued on his way home. But apparently this young man was used to seeing Bigfoot. He had other experiences, and a friend of his had experiences. And one of them had a brother who worked for the county nearby, and he drove a truck checking out roads and making sure everything was good. And one night he's got the yellow, this beacon on top of his truck, and suddenly a Bigfoot is chasing him down the road. And he's thinking, what the heck, it's going to.
No doubt.
And so, and for some reason he turned off the beacon, and as soon as he did, the creature looked, okay, and walked back in the woods. So he felt it was drawn to this light on top of his
Sure.
head.
Yeah.
I don't know how come he thought to turn that off, but
Probably not nearly as much later.
but
I mean,
and there were people who in the area who had one home had poltergeist activity, so naturally I had to go there, check that out. And there was a house where the family had some paranormal activity. They thought they found big footprint behind the house. I'm not sure, and some hair, which I gave to someone down in Florida and said that stuff stinks.
Well, if bear hair stinks too. So, but Bigfoot hair is supposed to be incredibly odoriferous. I just can't imagine.
But then she had a teenage daughter who had a boyfriend visiting one night, and a UFO came over and shot a beam of light down at him, and they were saying that a lot of times the mother and the daughter just seemed to know things, and they would call each other up at the same time. And she said one time she had a friend who was riding a motorcycle, and he had a wreck that killed him, and she saw it as it was happening psychically.
Wow.
So this
Wouldn't have
all,
liked that.
So there's all kinds of things that were going on there. And
Well, how, because I have interviewed Jock, right? And he was really interesting. He and Paolo had just written a book called Trinity, and it was about a crash that was before Roswell. Are you familiar with that crash?
I'm familiar with the story. I know there's been some people that have come forward and had worked on debunking some of the principals who were telling that story, saying that they weren't, indications that they weren't had contradicted themselves about details or were truthful.
Well, they were children.
So
when it happened.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how to take that. I know Jacques Vallée has taken some ribbon for that over that, but I mean, whatever that case there, I mean, Jacques Vallée has contributed so much to the field and continues to. I mean, if that was a something that wasn't really what it was presented as, for to all of us from time to time,
Well, it's easy because it's such a subjective experience, and you're talking to people who are saying it was theirs. So then, and people will believe what they're seeing, even if there may be another explanation for it. But it was one of those instances where children saw the incident and were the reporters basically of it, because they found the craft. The military found the craft because the comm tower went down ostensibly, and the telegraph lines went down. So because that's what the kids said, was that the craft clipped the top of the pole. But there's so many instances where the reporting people are children or people who are outside. It's not going to be somebody that's stuck in watching Wheel of Fortune every night, right? Because you have to be outside to see them. And unless they've already spotted you and they want to interact with you, and then they'll come to you, from what I understand. But do you feel like I want to go back to, your other expertise with the Mothman incident. Do you feel like that was a human interaction, the issues that came with that? Because there are people that are reporting seeing like a flying Birdman currently in Chicago.
Yeah,
the winged creatures.
There have been sightings. In fact, Keel wrote me in the 90s, and because I had written an article about the Mothman, and he wrote in my magazine, and he wrote and said he was no longer really interested in the subject. He said he'd received hundreds of letters from all over the world and people sharing similar accounts to a winged birdman or whatever. So he said it's actually fairly common. And I know in his, in his Mothman prophecies or
Mhm.
strange creature of time. I know he's written about other cases from like 1948 and even earlier of sightings of winged uh, humanoid type figures. So it is something that you know.
Did they all have disasters associated with them?
No, not necessarily. Um, but that's interesting that the with that Mothman situation. Now you said you knew Dan Drazen. Dan Drazen. What was that? Okay. No, I'm probably thinking about a
It's okay.
previous conversation. Um, back at that time when Keel was investigating West Virginia, when it just started out, there was a young film producer named Dan Drazen. He's mentioned in the Mothman Prophecies, and he had just seen a UFO with he and a fiance of his. And so someone said, hey, this man named John Keel in New York City is, because he lived in New York City, is going to go ahead and give a talk on UFOs. Why don't you go attend his talk? So he did. And Keel, they talked some and said, well, he displayed an interest in the subject and told him he was a film producer. So well, maybe you'd like to come down to West Virginia and, we'll I'll introduce you to Mary Hyre, the newspaper reporter, and some of the witnesses, and see what you might like to look into. Might look into this.
Right.
So he did. He made about 4 visits that year, and he did have a PBS affiliate in New York City that was interested. He brought the guy down on his 4th trip, and but lo and behold, it. For whatever reason, the company at the last minute pulled the plug on the project. But man, that would have been really good if they could have had all this on film with the witnesses. He interviewed a number of witnesses. He had actually seen some strange things himself. There's an account in the Mothman Prophecies where, okay, he, John Keel, and maybe Mary Hyre and some other people were at the airport, and a plane come along. No, I mean, wait. A UFO come along. It was a UFO to them. It went behind a cloud, and when it came out the other side, instead of being this strange silent light, it was a regular prop plane.
Really?
Yeah. And
that's interesting.
And he said he witnessed it. He said it was just this one little cloud, and the plane. I mean, the UFO came into it, and then it came out the other side. He said it was kind of like a Mary Poppins scene.
Woo!
and
the bag that changes things.
Yes.
Right? That has stuff in it.
And then he says that, Mary Hyre, the reporter, and he said she was very psychic, and she felt like they had a past life connection. And so, they had a good relationship, and she helped him, meet people and such. And then later he's in New York City, and he has this, he says, it's just hard to describe. There was like this weird, almost, tingling sensation. And it was almost like almost like I was seeing little like lights around me or something, sparkles. And he said, and then a half hour later, he gets a phone call from West Virginia from, let's see, it's the McDaniel family, who's the parents of Linda Scarberry, one of the original Mothman witnesses, saying that Mary Hyre had just passed away half an hour earlier, which was about the time that he had this strange sensation.
Wow.
And then on top of that, on December 15th, 1967, John Keel had this contact that reported that when I guess it was Lyndon Johnson was going to light up the Christmas tree, the annual event there, and America was going to see it live on TV, that suddenly there was going to be a huge power failure. Well, they already had reports that some disaster was going to occur on the Ohio River. They weren't sure what the cause was going to be. Instead of the power going out, it was actually, I mean, instead of the power going out like had been predicted, it was the disaster.
Wow.
The Silver Bridge collapse between Ohio and West Virginia, with 46 people, lost their lives. And when Keel got a hold of Mary Hire, she said it was horrible. People still looking for their family. There's a woman out here crying. She lost her husband. They found the body. He says, it's just like the dream I had. John said, Christmas packages floating on the Ohio. And
Wow.
and what was never reported in the Mothman prophecies, and I found out from Dan Statkinov, he sent me the letter from Keel where later he meets this guy named Joe, meets his wife in Macy's. And what happened that day is Joe showed up after years of not seeing his friend named Joe. They were like, he was like the best man at his wedding back in 1950. So he'd known him quite a few years. Suddenly he shows up after all this time. He even takes him to a UFO talk up in somewhere in downtown Manhattan. And they have lunch together. And he comes to the apartment when this news comes over the TV. Dan's there. He meets the guy. John Keel says, I met the wife. She said, I said, he asked how is Joe doing? He says, John, he died of a heart attack. And he says, oh no, when? He says, it was back in July of 1965. He said, I met him in December of 67.
Wow.
She's like, don't be ridiculous. And he says, no, we talked about everything. I mean, it was his memories and everything. And so what was that, And he told some other people that I had talked to later that had talked to Keel, and he mentioned that same incident, but he didn't tell who it was to them, although we know who it was now. But Keel told them that they caused him many sleepless nights.
I'm sure.
He couldn't. That was one thing he couldn't really wrap his mind around. Now, Keel was a lifelong atheist, although he confessed that he could be an agnostic. You just leave a little bit of doubt,
Well, but it's really interesting because when you have something that there's an anomalous moment that there's no explanation for, and you don't believe in an afterlife, then that had to be something that kept him up nights.
Yeah.
Here or there.
Yeah, he believed that there was phenomena of intelligence between the parallel world. He said he would tell people, he felt like more of a demonologist than a ufologist. He felt that they were deceptive, they were tricksters, didn't trust them, and that there was real intelligence from another reality. That was his take on it, and so, but his whole story, as I pieced it all together, I found out that as a child he'd had experiences, poltergeists. At age 7, he and his stepfather and his mother were riding to a small town up in New York State, and there was this bright light up on a hill, and they thought a barn was on fire or something. And then it rose up, and it was a big, brilliant ball of light. And it came up, and then it took off. And there were people around the neighborhood when he was 10 who said that there was a gorilla ran across the road and the farmers were coming out of their guns. And he said, of course, now we know that was a Bigfoot. There was a poltergeist in the farmhouse, and he was knocking on his wall, so he knocked back and tried to figure out some kind of code to communicate. When he decided to investigate UFOs in '66, he went to the Pentagon and spoke with someone and said, oh, there's nothing to this UFOs, Mr. Keel. It's a waste of time. And he says, well, I've seen them. So.
Well, that kind of put that debunking right to bed.
It did.
That's funny.
And then, he did have, when he was 17 or 18, living in New York City. I think it was 18, because, I was 18, because he left home at age 17 with 75 cents in his pocket, and hitchhiked to New York City because he wanted to become a writer, which he
Went to New York City with 75 cents.
yeah. And
My daughter went to New York City. Do not try that with 75 cents or 75,000.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
well, maybe back in 1947, maybe it was more.
It still would not be enough.
But no. But it must have been a shock,
No, they probably had hostels, but different names back then.
But anyway, at age 18, he's in this room on Times Square, and he has a spiritual cosmic consciousness type experience. And suddenly he had answers to everything, all knowing. I guess,
Were drugs involved?
Presumably not.
Okay.
It's just, he didn't say. But anyway, the next morning,
Sometimes that creates those.
in the morning, he vaguely remembered some of what he had found out, but he said it was like it was all downloaded to his subconscious. So, but he knew that these things really happen to people, But when he investigated UFOs in '66, he was looking at it as strictly ET nuts and bolts. But then he went to West Virginia and found, like Mothman witnesses, and I probably interviewed like around 100, that half of them had these profound psychic experiences, and I think that caused him to reflect on, his earlier life, and maybe it helped him to connect the dots a little quicker than the regular journalist, because he had these experiences himself, and he also in 1951 because he was born in 1930. In '51, he was drafted, and they said, "Well, you're a journalist. There's a radio station, Armed Forces Radio, over in Germany.
Armed Forces Radio is wonderful stuff. I've been a guest on there before, and it just makes you feel so patriotic and enthused, and the messaging that I would get back. You sound like home. So I am all about Armed Forces Radio.
Well, he enjoyed it. He would do these shows about travel, like if you want to take a vacation, go here, go there. He went to Egypt and did a live broadcast from inside one of the pyramids at night. And then he also, they have Frankenstein's castle, so he sent a reporter up to, cover the story, and then he had someone come up and spook him live.
That's good. Y'all have to admit, that's funny.
Yeah.
I love that.
So anyway, and then he became a foreign correspondent in Berlin and different places over in Europe, Egypt, and so he traveled around. He wrote a book in 1957 called Jadoo, Mysteries of the Orient, and it was supposed to be magic or black magic. And he went from Egypt to way over the other side to Singapore, with all these places with, the magic land of India and Tibet and so on. And one of his first ideas was to become a stage magician, so he was always interested in magic. But then he started writing for a local paper in New York around age 12 or so, and he'd get like $2 a week for, what he wrote was called Scraping the Keel.
Guys, that's even funnier. Okay. That's a great title.
Yeah.
He was so clever.
Yeah. Well, he actually had about a dozen different names that he wrote under, and he wrote, all kinds of subjects. He wrote fiction. He wrote photography magazine. He wrote for High Times. He wrote for all kinds of men's magazines.
Well, see, there you go with the drug-induced experiences again.
Well,
I know people who use ayahuasca regularly. I can't even imagine doing that experience once. It's rough, just in case you don't know.
Yes.
I mean, if
Not
you're
that I've
wanting,
ever done it with, yes.
but it is rough. I mean, from what I have been told, it's a lot worse than like a regular acid trip. I've heard people that did both compare them, and they're like, ayahuasca will turn you inside out.
Yes.
And I did not like how that sounded.
But some people have had tremendous, interesting journeys on that stuff.
Well,
you know.
they have, and it's not controllable.
It's,
Some of them
actually,
sounded interesting, though.
yeah, Raynes had an interesting ayahuasca experience.
I've talked to a lot of retired military people who are in this field that have shared some of that. And for one thing, I'm not real keen on going to Peru because a friend of mine was there doing studying the little mummies, and the military got kind of rough with her, and she was there with a group that included her husband, and when they started being less than gentlemen with her, she is not one to go quietly, and so every American probably for 20 miles or so could hear her, and it was not allowed to continue.
Was the mummies the ones that they're talking about, maybe the alien type? Huh.
What is it? The Atacama? I think that Atacama
I was thinking
is close to
I
that.
was thinking the Nazca or something.
But it's the name of the desert that they're found in. But I was just so surprised. She actually went and got a degree in forensics just to be able to go and do that expedition, because she was going to be given access to the skulls and such in
That's
Peru and
crazy.
Bolivia.
I know, we know this lady who moved from Florida, I believe, down to, she lives down around what they call the very navel of Peru. It's near Machu Picchu.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, she's lived down there for quite a number of years now. She loves it. She leads tours, and man, I hadn't heard anything like that going on.
Well, this was, they were there at the behest of the government. And it was, they had gone and they'd gotten the samples from the elongated skulls and things of that nature, and then testing the mummy. But it was while they were doing the skull, and, the elongated skulls interaction, that the incident occurred, when they were leaving.
And they didn't. They thought she was doing something wrong there or something.
I think they saw a cute, sexy, fun, energetic woman and just thought it went well.
Oh.
They were not gentlemen,
Oh, okay.
but the men traveling with her were. And one of them was her husband. So that got fixed really quickly.
Well, that's good.
But, you just, and that's something else too, because if you're going into an environment dealing with an unusual topic, then sometimes you're going to draw attention while you're there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that would have been different if she were just going there on vacay or whatever. But she's a feisty individual. She really is. And she was not going down quietly either. They were just trying to intimidate and be rude.
Damn. All right. Well, I know that I've done some programs about the white shaded little mummy figures.
Yeah.
At the time, they were having
Atacama.
the big. I know there was some lab down there, and this guy in New York City that I interviewed, he'd been down there and spoken with some of the people, and had his picture taken with one of the mummy figures, and he was very interested in it, very passionate. And I had someone from Lima that I knew, Giorgio Pienza. He's interested in UFOs. He's had some experiences, and he had talked to some people that thought maybe they were just, some of them were hoaxes, and I think they were, but I think there's some that may have been authentic. And I had them both on at the same time, and it was a little bit of friction at first. But then the guy in Peru, though, he speaks very good English. He studied at Princeton, no, Georgetown, sorry. And they got along after that. But, of course, the guy in New York, he says, he got upset, and he told me afterwards, he says, Georgetown, the CIA gets a lot of people from their young students,
Well, a lot of people who are already in government get their advanced degrees there. Princeton, there, Harvard. I mean, but Georgetown is pretty
notorious, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Some of the professors are pretty notorious too.
But in this case, my main concern was, until we know for sure, let's listen to these people. And I mean, they were having these hearings. Should they go ahead and preserve these things for further study, or should they just destroy them, discard them, or maybe sell them to buyers overseas, which some have been doing?
Yes.
There were people illegally entering these sites and
taking them. Yeah.
But there were stories of some people who claimed that, again, it was from some of the people who were stealing, that they went there and there was actually, some of these beings were still living there,
I had heard that, under the desert.
Yeah. And so that was all very interesting. I mean, I don't know what the ultimate truth was, but if there is something to it, if there is at least a genuine archaeological, authentic thing with bodies that are a species we're not familiar with, we need to at least check it out. There were people from foreign countries coming, I think even Russia, with specialists who were saying, yeah, this looks kind of interesting.
Well, have you seen them?
Just photographs.
Me too. But I think it's an interesting idea, because they do. I mean, there's supposedly a physiologically sound explanation for what species of something this is, but it's funky. It's really funky, and that's like the Star Child skull has been discredited for having a different. It was supposedly a bound head, and the Peruvians did find, but this one did not really look like the typical Peruvian elongated skull either.
It's interesting how many different parts of the world, far removed from, other sites, had that tradition of combining the skulls, creating the elongated.
And it spread when there wasn't transportation that we know of.
That we know of, yeah, because there are those who suggest that there was more going on. It's just pre-history, some of it that we haven't recorded.
Well, I have to ask you then, prehistory. Oh, come on, you're up for it. But have you ever talked with Von Daniken about Nazca?
Eric Von Daniken? No. No, the only time I saw Eric Von Daniken in person was in Jacksonville, Florida, where he gave a lecture, and afterwards I just walked through the line and shook his hands. Very interesting.
He is very interesting, right?
Yeah.
But I heard him talk about, because he worked, made money, went and traveled, went home, worked as a waiter, and went and traveled. And he went to Peru, and he said there were thousands of these. And of course that was probably 70 years ago. So to me, the clarity of the images because he just had a little, I guess like a brownie camera. Yeah. And the imagery was pretty great because, there wasn't pollution, there hadn't been tourism, there wasn't any of that nature stuff. And I think that if I were going to believe full blown everything on ufology, I think that seeing Nazca in that pristine condition like that might have been my switch that got flipped to make me think, okay, these people are interacting with something that they know is over them, that will enjoy the visuals of these. And if they had the level of designs that they did then, that wasn't just dragging your foot. You'd have had to drag your foot for 75 years to be able to create these things. So I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
There's a lot of old school
I used to want
research.
I used to want to go to Peru just to like go to some of those walls that are just all these different shapes that they fit together like a big jigsaw puzzle. Just perfect where you can't even stick a blade.
Those H blocks. My husband's a machinist and he is mesmerized by that because he can't do that with a CNC machine.
Yeah,
He probably could, but
so
the average person
how
can't.
could they do it with the primitive tools that they supposedly had at the time? Unless this maybe some prehistory technology we don't know about, you know.
Yeah.
And but you know, it's intriguing. And Eric von Däniken wrote an introduction or forward to Origins of the Gods, written by Greg Rule, my friend Greg Rule, who's helped me with a magazine ever since 1985. He's been publisher and editor and columnist and article contributor and many other things. Andrew Collins, who's a historian, really on the know a lot of things, and Greg wrote the first half of the book, and Andrew wrote the last half, and it's dynamite. And Eric von Däniken was so impressed. He thinks, yeah, these guys are onto something. And Andrew Collins got to go into over in Israel with some archaeologists down into a subterranean area, a shaman's type activity cave, thousands of years old. I mean, what? I mean, and he got to hold some of the objects, the artifacts, and found all kinds of stories and legends in different places. I mean, he's a globetrotter.
He's so good at that.
Oh man! And before he did all that globetrotting, I mean, he used to write for Flying Saucer Reading. He was a ufologist, and he covered some really back in the 70s as a young man. He was very actively involved as a field investigator, and he investigated one of the most thought-provoking cases to me in England back in October 1974 when a family with 3 kids drove into this strange bog and they had missing time. And then the memory of what happened came back in bits and pieces. And Andrew Collins investigated the family, wrote a 2-part article in FSR, and he spent time at their house. He even would stay overnight and had experiences himself while there.
Really?
Which I of course had to interview him about. That was really fascinating.
Yeah.
Because as I remember, it was like he actually felt something they had experienced was like an energy going from your toes to your head.
Okay.
And he saw a person standing at a staircase and then realized, wait, who was that? There's nobody else that's supposed to be there. And he heard things, silverware or pans rattling in the kitchen going, there's nobody there. Yeah. So
that's fun.
So, and this family was having, they were having
I'm weird.
out of body experiences and all kinds of high strange. And I corresponded with that guy, John Day was his name. He got interested in visiting ancient sites over in English. They have some really, incredible, the stone circles and everything, and the energy associated with them. For some reason, he got into that. And so I think that experience back, investigating that back in the 70s certainly sent Andrew off in the direction he is now. And I think it was about 2006, I first met Andrew over at Greg's house in Memphis, Tennessee. And I happened to have a set of 7 replicas of the Peruvian whistling vessels
Mhm.
that were on loan for me, but they're created by a guy that we later met, Stanley Stakanoff.
Stakanoff.
He back in 1972, he was at an auction around Philadelphia. Wasn't interested in archaeology or anything like that, but there was suddenly this guy brought out. I have this whistling vessel. It's like a 2-chamber Chimu whistling vessel from Peru.
Was it a death whistle?
Huh?
Was it a death whistle?
Oh no, it was a double chamber whistle. A lot of them had effigies of a person's face on it, animals engraved on them. Sometimes there were things that were rather, you might want to hide from the kids, but you would blow into it. Joan actually, when we met Stan, he actually gave Joan some of his
Like,
the molds.
oh yeah.
Yeah, yes, the molds.
It's not just me.
and instructions on what to do.
Yes.
Although with grandkids, it's been rather hard to get back to that. But she made some prototypes, and he listened to them, and they were very good. And Greg had also sent me a box of Peruvian whistles made by people in Peru who are still continuing the art form. Although when the Spanish first arrived in the 1532 or whenever it was, they saw it as the work of heathens. This is devil's work, and they stopped at that time, or else some of them went underground. But the whistles create a binaural effect, and it has that kind of effect on people, like Monroe Institute and Bob Monroe's. So anyway, so we've done that, and let's say in 2005 when we spoke at the ARA UFO conference with Jacques and everybody, I brought 4 of the whistles there with me, and put them in the 4 corners of this big auditorium and blew them, and well-known abductee Betty Aderson Luker was there, and she wasn't even blowing a whistle. She was maybe 20 feet away, but she had this wild vision of a huge stone, upright stone, with a ring of fire down at the bottom, and on the other side of the stone was this giant bird. And she drew it out for me, and she sent it to me, and it was meant something to her. It's kind of like, Ray Fowler's first book showing this. I think the symbol of a tall eagle that appeared to her in a vision or experience or whatever it was. But anyway,
that is so cool.
But it was a journey. I mean, we would go and do different talks, and we would bring them on, Greg and Laura Little, through the ARA, Association for Research and Enlightenment, which is the intercase organization. In different states, we would go periodically with people from the ARA would join us, and Greg and Laura, they would ride around on a bus and go from different site to different site in Ohio or Georgia, West Virginia, visit mound sites and ancient earthworks. And sometimes people would say they saw spirits and things. It was kind of cool. And we would do the whistles and things.
Especially mound sites. In Alabama, we have a whole town named Moundville because of the native mounds that are right on a river. And when there is a lot of activity reported, by the people that live there, not just people coming in. And my husband's family is from that area. And Moundville was a elementary school trip every year for different grades. And it was interesting.
We went down there a few years ago, and I'd written the paper and got a printout from 1930 or around 1930 something, where the guy that the museum's named after now, an archaeologist, had found these tall skeletal figures. But now they don't want to talk about it.
They don't want to talk about anything mystical whatsoever there. But as a person with some limited, but some abilities, when I go there, it's just, it doesn't creep me out, but every sense is tingling. I mean, something is trying to fully engage, and that just blows my mind. Before I was comfortable with it,
Mhm.
it was a lot different. I did not like going to Mouthful.
Yeah.
But I didn't get to stay home because of that.
Well, I went down there, chose the time that we went down there because there was a gentleman who used to go there as a kid, and he's now an archaeologist, and he had been in Central America investigating cultures there, but he was very interested in the southeastern. I think it's got various names. One is the southeastern death cult and the symbolism associated with it, and he had worked out that some of these people believed in, the path of souls. The Milky Way took you to what was the North Star at one point, Deneb, this Sirius constellation. And Andrew Collins wrote a book a few years ago called The Cygnus Mystery.
Yes.
And he had noticed that at other sites, over in Turkey and such. And he came over here with Greg, and they went to sites too here in North America and found the same correlations. What is it? Why did they have these, some of these places aligned with toward the north to this, So, and here, this scientist independently, so I gave him a copy. I had an extra copy of that book, Cygnus Mystery, and gave it to him and hoped to engage him in conversation later, but that never happened. I'd call, and he was always out of his office, but anyway, it was just interesting. He wrote a book and he mentioned that, and independently. And of course, he might have read the book and thought, this Andrew Collins is into some wild stuff.
Andrew Collins is into some wild stuff.
He is, yes. It's great stuff.
In fact, he had his publisher reach out to me with, I think it was 2 years ago, he had a book coming out, but the book was coming out in 2 weeks. And I was so booked. And I was like, well, we could do a pre-record and I could run it. He was like, well, the person I was communicating with was like, well, he really needs it done now. And I'm like, I can't do that. I'm so sorry. And because it doesn't matter if I'm booked, I'm committed, but I sure would have done a pre-record with him because I think that he is one of the smartest men in his field. And that's saying something. That really is saying something.
And he uses a lot of his intuition and inner
guidance.
He has skills. I mean, when we went over with these Peruvian whistles, and I think I started to tell a story, and then I got derailed. But we went out on the pontoon of this lake that was in front of where Greg lived, Greg Little, and there was 7 of us with 7 whistles, and we started blowing them. And it was interesting how he grasped onto things. Greg doesn't normally have a reaction to anything like this, but I can see where for Andrew it's just a daily thing. And so there were 4 of us, and then later Jones told me, well, she felt something very similar, but did I just ignore you at the time? I don't know. I'm sorry.
I don't usually speak out in the crowd. I tell people quietly afterwards or on the side, but I don't usually say anything right at the moment because I don't like for the focus to be on me.
Which is why she's sitting off camera.
But anyway, there was, as we began talking about it, there were four of us, myself, Greg Little, Andrew Collins, and another guy, local guy named Jim, who did landscaping. And I didn't have to add that, but anyway.
We needed to know, right?
Yeah.
We did.
So anyway, all of us described seeing it like a vortex. And then not only that,
In the
when I asked-
water?
yeah, well, some of it looked like an energy vortex, some of it looked like water, but turns out we were all seeing it going the same direction.
Mhm.
And then Andrew, he started telling about seeing other things. I mean, this guy dives deep, and
That's right, Dave.
you know, symbols and things. And then he gets really excited. He says, "You know what, Brent? You need to keep at this, and maybe go into the vortex. Maybe get a group together and do, weekly gatherings."
He would definitely go into the vortex,
Yeah.
but he would have a hard time getting people to go into it with him.
But,
Although he is a great motivator, but still.
but anyway, it was just really interesting to meet him and to.
But when he came back, he'd have stories.
Yes. Oh, yes. And I got to interview him, my first interview with him, and talked about that case from 1974. And I just blasted him with it. I mean, he said something, I think, which indicated that, I wasn't prepared to talk about this, but he was doing a great job. I thought. I mean, he'd had a book called Alien Energy that Greg reprinted.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of neat stuff in there, and I wanted to cover some of that and the thing from Flying Saucer Review. And then one time there was a guy in Texas who allowed me to come on his show, and like, who should we talk to? Well, Andrew Collins. Andrew Collins happened to be in the United States, and he was over with Martha Lights. And while he was on the radio with us, he missed the lights. Sorry, Andrew.
Well, he probably did not mind.
He's had, I'm sure he's had other experiences.
Well, maybe not. Maybe that was exactly what he wanted to do right then. Or I guarantee you he would not have done it. Because he is assertive.
Yes, he is.
He is a very assertive person, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But, well, we are almost out of time, even with editing on that dead time. Guys, if you're watching this right now, thank you so much, because I didn't really intend to be going live, and I'm not even sure it's going out anywhere. But if it is, I hope you enjoyed it. And
Yeah.
I didn't really put a feed line in there, but it is recording. So
Okay. Oh, now I should mention that I have an online magazine called
yes, you should.
Alternate Perceptions, www.apmagazine.info, and it's free and comes out once a month on the 1st. It's got archived back issues, and we have like interviews, and not as good as this one, of course, and book reviews and articles. So, anyway. So thank you very much, Kate, for
Or cat.
Sorry.
Everybody calls me Kate. Usually it's old British men, but that's okay. You're not quite British.
No, but
So-
my ancestors came from a little while.
Mine too. But, I have had such a good time being here, and I didn't get to hear your lecture. And
No, my lecture's tomorrow.
then I will be hearing his lecture, because I'm here till Monday. And I am just so, I thought you spoke this morning.
Hmm.
Well, then thank God I didn't miss that. So, but it's so much fun, because you never know who you're going to run into here. This is probably the most intimate and laid back UFO conference I've ever been to. I love coming here. And Ozark Mountain Publishing is a great place to find like alternative thoughts in their authors. There's a lot of healing here. In fact, Loris Cannon, the quantum hypnosis theory is one of the best healing methods I know of. And I missed a word in that. It's the QHHT. But Kathy Martin is somebody that does that very well. Julia Canning, y'all have heard her on with me. That's one of her daughters. Nancy who is putting on this great event with the whole Ozark Mountain Publishing crew. And, you know, I always find people that I didn't know I needed to know when I come here. And you're one of them.
Oh,
So
thank you.
things work out the way they're supposed to, I think. And I'm never bored when I'm here. And I'm always appreciative of the opportunity to be here. So they let me come, right? Yay. So, and they let you come too. And thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kat.
So we're going to go because, you know, it's getting on.
And it's about time to go eat.
It is about time to go eat. And Lori's probably eating without me. So my
Oh,
travel
no.
buddy is Lori Dorsey. I've seen her on the show. She's my production assistant when I'm here doing things like this, but not right now when I needed one. I'm just kidding. She was going out to do a past life regression. You can get just about anything done here. So we will talk to you later. Same cat time, same cat channel. Thank you so much. And we'll talk to you then. Good night.